Hello, everybody. What happens when you buy a property and after closing you discover an issue with the property? Today we're going to go into what is called the law of latent defect. Let's go. So, first of all, in a lot of things in real estate, it's buyer beware. Basically, if a buyer takes the property, the seller cannot be held responsible for issues that happened after closing. And by take the property, I mean closing date. And however, there's one exception to the rule. Before we get into that, let me just pull up a contract and give you an example. For example, here's one clause that is found in many real estate contracts. It says the seller represents that chattels and fixtures are in good working order and free from liens on completion. This is closing date, okay? Now, the parties agree that this representation and warranty, so the sentence before, shall survive and not merge on the completion of this transaction, but only apply to the state of the property at completion of this transaction. So basically, it's a very legal and confusing way of basically saying on closing, once we close, if you break anything or anything happens, it's your fault because, you know, they're trying to be fair to both parties. So let's say a buyer, goes in and uses the laundry machine incorrectly, like maybe doesn't take out the lint, and seller shouldn't be responsible, right? And um, what about wear and tear, right? The seller shouldn't be responsible for any wear and tear repairs. So now we're going to go into a case where there might be a legal basis for the buyer to claim some kind of damages against the seller. And this is called latent defect. Okay? So latent defect is a physical defect that cannot be easily discovered through normal observation. It's opposite of patent defect, which is something that is clearly visible. So for example, let's say there's a big hole in the wall, or like the carpet is like stained with like a green paint. And when you do a showing, you can definitely see that. So that would be a patent defect. And a seller would not have to disclose that because anyone doing a reasonable inspection can see this. And we're all going to assume that, hey, you're buying the property as as you see it, right? So what is a latent defect? So there are three criterias. Number one, the defect needs to be unfit for habitation. That defines a defect. So if it's a small thing, like maybe like a kid drew something on the wall, like a happy face with just a pencil that you can erase, that's not a latent defect. And it's not latent as well. Let me give you an example of something latent that's not really a defect. So let's say uh, when you're renovating the house, you find like two marbles in the wall. Uh, it doesn't really affect, it doesn't make it unfit for habitation. You couldn't have found the marbles, but it doesn't matter. So in terms of, the value of the property and being fit for habitation. Number two, the seller had to have no knowledge of the defect. Sorry, the seller had to have knowledge of the defect. So let's say there is something, a latent, a defect, such as, let's say there was a raccoon that came in through the chimney and died in the walls, and they're decaying inside. And on closing, up to closing, the seller didn't know about this. And then later it causes issues. Maybe it, while it's decaying, it causes a bad smell and corrodes some pipes. Then the seller won't be responsible because they didn't know about this defect. Okay. And number three, we're going to assume that the seller had knowledge and didn't disclose. So they try to conceal it. So signs of concealment uh, maybe they knew about the raccoon and then you can see that, oh, they like even painted over the stain that it left in the wall. Um, you can look for that. So let's keep going on each of these. So unfit for habitation, what does it mean, right? So one criteria you can use for unfit for habitation is something basically major, the defect. that if the buyer knew of this, they might not have agreed to purchase the property, or they might have asked for a big reduction in purchase price. So basically, big issues, not a small little thing, not a little scratch on the wall. And then let's go to another criteria. So the meaning of latent, as I said before, means it's hard to see with a reasonable inspection. So you can kind of see if you hire, kind of the law would say, if you did hire a home inspector, could this have been found out? So right now there's a real life case where the heaters are not working. However, it's in a condo where they don't turn on the heaters until winter, and we bought in summer. So would the home inspector have been able to test it? Most likely not, because the condominium management turns it off, so there's no way to test if the heaters work. And this is similar to buying a pool, a property with a pool in the winter. There's no way to test if it works because it's frozen and covered up. So, however, if it's something that the home inspector should have found out, and the seller can say that, oh, your home inspector should have found this. And if it is true, then the buyer may be able to make a claim against the home inspector. Okay. However, please keep in mind that some defects that are potentially out of this beyond the scope of a home inspector, because the home inspector cannot find every single thing that could potentially be a defect in a property. Just want to give another real life example from one of my buyers. They recently bought a property and they hired some people to do the plumbing that didn't do that good of a job, but it works. However, it's just not perfect. It's kind of loud and there's some bad smells, but it works. In that case, it's hard to prove that's unfit for habitation because you're kind of buying it as is, and a home inspector could have found this out by looking at the pipes under the sink. So if you end up being a buyer who is in this situation, what are your choices? For a lot of people, suing is really expensive. Lawyer fees are going to be in the thousands, maybe 2,000, 3,000. And if you lose the case, then you're just going to have to pay that lawyer fees, and you're going to lose more money than just paying the repairs, because you would have had to repair it and pay the lawyer fees. So for the example of one of my clients who had a broken heater, it cost $500, and lawyer fee is going to be 2,000. But however, if you do win, check this out here. Ontario follows the loser pays rule. So at the conclusion of the litigation, the loser usually must pay the winner. So let's say you're the buyer and seller loses. You win. They will pay some of your legal costs, 30 to 70%. So you can see if it's worth it at that time. However, if you lose, you're not only going to lose the 500 that you have to repair the heater, you're also going to lose all the legal fees. So I would say generally it's more worth it to try to make a strong legal case without a lawyer, present it to the seller and say, hey, I could sue you and most likely win. Do you want to settle out of court now? Um, or, and basically you're telling the seller, you have a very strong case. So in my opinion, the stronger case you have and the more expensive to repair, the more worth it is to actually sue them. But if you want to get damages, even for a smaller amount, um, you can go ahead and just present your case to the seller directly and kind of almost threaten to sue. And if your case is really strong, the sellers might agree to pay you the damages because they don't want to lose the damages. If they lose, they'll have to pay the 500, which in this case is the heater, plus lawyer fees. So it's better for them to just pay the 500. However, when things get really expensive, the seller has another decision. They could maybe, let's say it's 10,000, right? So their choices are lose 10,000 paying you, settle out of court, or they can go to court, lose, they'll lose 10,000 plus 2,000 in legal fees. And they have to pay like 1,000 or 2,000 of your legal fees. So that's 14,000. So at that point they have to look at the probability of them winning the case. And the probability all comes down to this latent defect rules that I talked about. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Contact me if you have any questions at all.